and welcome to the premiere episode of Start the Conversation. My name is Dawn Marie, and first, before we even get started here today, I'd like to mention that the content of what we're going to be describing in relation to child abuse might be a bit of a sensitive issue for younger ears to be hearing. Please be aware that if you have children in the room as you're tuning in today. Second, I'd like to make a disclaimer that I am not a legal expert, I am not a child psychology expert, I am not an expert in any sort. Anything that I'm speaking about today, I'm speaking solely from my experience as a survivor. Well, I guess to start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and my story. My name is Dawn Marie Osland. I've been born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta. Approximately 25 years ago, I was held hostage by my stepfather. After we were held hostage, it came out to light that he had been sexually abusing me since I was 5 years of age. Over the course of 10 years, the man had sexually assaulted me 1,400 times, with a minimum of 500 of those being full-out rape. Now, 25 years later, I've decided that it's time to step forward in order to start the conversation, in order to possibly open up the doors to changing the future on how society talks about, views, and what we do about child sexual abuse. I'm here today because I am going to be answering some questions that some loyal readers of my blog have sent in for me to answer. My blog can be located at www.braveenough.bydawnmarie.com. All of the links that are mentioned in today's episode will appear later in the comments section below the Facebook Live. So let's go to our first question, which comes from Jenny in Saskatoon. She asked me, how was Jack able to keep you from telling anybody for so many years? That's not exactly an easy question to answer. The basic answer that I can come up with for that would be out of fear. Fear is how my stepfather Jack was able to keep me from telling anybody, from believing that anybody would even hear me if I said anything. And what I mean by fear, in order to illustrate that, I'm going to read an excerpt from my blog that describes one of the very first times that I really started to believe that he was a very dangerous man. You see, before any of the sexual abuse started, my stepfather domestically abused and physically abused my mother numerous times. So this is one of the worst times that he actually assaulted her. As the weeks passed by, and by the time September came around, their arguments would become more frequent and louder. The sounds of their elevated voices would wake me out of a deep sleep. I would lay in bed with my pillow over my head, hoping the noise would just stop. The arguments began to escalate to physical violence. I could hear the sounds of glass breaking and people wrestling around in the house. In between the loud bangs, I would hear my mother scream, telling me to get out of the house. I would never reply. I would just lay in my bed, ever so still, with my eyes closed tightly, pretending to be sleeping. My bedroom door was typically closed at night, and they had never came into my room before when they were fighting. So I figured I'd be okay if I just stayed there ever so quiet. Unfortunately, that would not be the case one night in October of 1981. My mother and Jack would have returned to the house in rare form after being out for the evening. They had been enraged with each other ever since they left the bar, and it was only increasing the more and more closer that they got to home. By the time they walked in the door, you could cut the tension in between them with a knife. After they sent the babysitter home, the banging and screaming began. As their voices got louder and closer to me, I could hear my name being mentioned, but I could not make out the rest. Soon, they were right outside my room, pushing each other about. My mother was trying to get into me so that we could leave the house, but Jack had no intention of letting her into my room. He kept pushing her down and hitting her with his fists. There was no way in hell he was ever letting her leave that house. My mother eventually backed off and retreated into the kitchen away from the door. The house became eerily quiet for a few minutes before my mother seen an opening to run from my room and get me out of my bed. She came storming through my door and whispered to me, "Get up, we gotta go." Within seconds, Jack was behind her with his arm reached out in an attempt to grab her by the neck. Jack would take her by the neck and lay her down on the bed in front of me, as he instructed her not to move, or he would kill her right in front of her daughter. I froze in fear. I could not believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. My mother started to struggle under his grasp on the bed. When she did, he pulled out a very long, sharp butcher knife and pointed it directly at me. My mother stopped moving instantly as she saw the knife within inches of my tiny chest. As she lay there completely still, Jack pushed her up further on the bed and then turned the knife on himself, but not before pulling me up towards my mother's head so that I could watch the horror show along with her. With his knee pressed against her chest, he rose up and started to stick the knife into his own neck. I watched the blood slowly drip down his neck as I would hear him say, "Eileen, if you try to leave me, I will kill myself right here, right now, in front of Dawn Marie." In that moment, she slowly reached up and put her hand gently on top of Jack's hand, hoping to get the knife away from him. As she did, he pushed the knife deeper into his own neck, and the blood started to drip down her arm, onto the white sheets of my bed, and eventually onto my white flannel nightgown. Seeing the blood terrified me. That moment froze in time. It felt like there was a darkness creeping up all around me, like something was coming for me to lay their mark upon my soul. The fear was suffocating me as I watched everything around me move as if it was going in slow motion. Somewhere in all the chaos, my mother Eileen shoved Jack away from me and yelled at me to get out of the house and get the police. At that moment, I stumbled out of my bed, through my bedroom door, down over the back stairs, and outside the back door to safety. As you can see, before the abuse even started, and at such a young age, I had been exposed to such a high level of physical violence that in my mind, he was a monster. He was somebody I was terrified of. And every time he threatened me, when it came in relation to possibly coming out and telling somebody about what he was doing to me, I always remembered that moment in time, seeing that knife, seeing that blood, and running out of my home for my life. That fear stayed with me. Even to this day, reading those words, I can still smell the air that was in the room, feel the emotions of what happened, and when I close my eyes, I can still see it as if it happened yesterday. So to answer your question, Jenny, fear is how he controlled me all of those years. Okay, so now on to question 2. From Tim from Hamilton, Ontario, sent in this question via Facebook. Bringing awareness to sexual abuse is a very noble thing, but how are you going to take the next step to prevent it from happening any further? Thanks for the question, Tim. Firstly, I want to say that I'm not foolish enough to believe that I personally can stop child sexual abuse from happening. My goal is that is not my goal. My goal is to help start the conversation so that way survivors feel supported. In our society, we shun away from the words child sexual abuse. We hear when somebody tells us, or we hear it being talked about, but we tend to disclose ourselves away from that conversation. I'm hoping by coming forward, not only telling my own story, but bringing this Facebook Live series, Start the Conversations to light, that we can start approaching this topic in a more real manner, because it's all around us. Survivors are everywhere. They're all around you. They're in the lineup at the Safeway, across the counter at the Tim Hortons, sitting next to you in a movie theater, or in the desk right down the hall from you at work. The numbers don't lie, and we are everywhere. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys. Those are numbers that are really hard to swallow. And I know you might be thinking to yourself, well, that would never happen in my family. It would never happen on my street, in my community, in my neighborhood. Truth be told, that's not the case. And I want you to think about this the next time you're at a child's birthday party, you're watching your grandson's soccer game, you're watching your children's football game, or their swim meet, or at a school concert. Look around the room at the number of children and think about those numbers for a minute. 1 in 3 girls. 1 in 6 boys. It's all around us. And to make matters even worse, 80% of these sexual assaults happen from someone the survivor knows. The old rule of stranger danger, and watch out for the scary men in the white vans approaching the school with candy. That's not what's happening here. These are people that are right beside us, right down the street, right next to the children. People that we consider family, people we consider friends. These pedophiles are hiding right in plain sight, right beside us where nobody can see. Well, it's time that we stop letting there be places for them to hide. It's time we start talking about this and bringing it into the light. Question number 3 is from Tanya in St. John's, Newfoundland, sent in via Twitter. Put it down. What would you say to survivors out there? Well, I got to tell you, Tanya, that is a big question for me to answer. The first thing I'd want to say to fellow survivors out there is I believe you, and you're not alone. Secondly, I would like to make them a promise, I guess maybe a vow, that from this day forward until the very last breath leaves my body, that I will not leave your side. I will not leave making noise and starting the conversation from coast to coast to Canada until all of our electoral officials, whether they be on the municipal level, the provincial level, or the federal level, hear what we have to say. I am not going anywhere. I will be your voice. I will do what I can to bring our stories to light, so that way we can help spread awareness across our beautiful country and save children out in that very country. Something I want to make very clear out there to all of the survivors. We are not victims. We are survivors. We were victimized. And we all heal at a different rate, in a different way, through different opportunities. There is no instruction manual that tells you how long or how you should feel or how long that's going to go on for. Everybody is unique, and every survivor's journey to healing and moving forward is unique. So for everybody out there that is supporting those survivors, please remember that. Show patience, show love, because everybody goes through the healing process at their own pace. Now I have a message out there for survivors out there. It's not always easy to come forward and tell your story. Not everybody is comfortable doing that, and that's okay. But I want to let you know that if you would like to have your story told, or if you have a question, or you have something, a statement that you want to make known, that you can go to my blog at www.braveenough.com, and under the link Survivor's Corner, you can submit your stories anonymously, and I will share your stories for you. I am willing to be your voice if you will let me. I would also like to take an opportunity to be able to take a shout out to this year's launch of the I Believe You campaign. The time has come for survivors everywhere to know that we believe them. And the time has come for them to know it's not your fault. What happened to you is not your fault. You are not alone. As an Albertan, I'm a little miffed at the MLAs for Alberta. Back in the beginning of August, I reached out to each MLA's office in the province, asking them to show their support for survivors across Alberta by making their own I Believe You picture. I can say now, multiple weeks later, that I've only heard back from 2 of our elected officials in our province. The first one being Marlon Schmidt, he is the MLA for the Edmonton Gold Bar area. I want to say thank you very much, Marlon, for your support. And the second being our Honourable Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley. Thank you very much for your support, Rachel. I'm honestly disappointed in the rest of you. So I'm going to officially challenge each one of you MLAs and your district offices to put together an I Believe You photo and make some noise for this campaign, to show fellow Albertans that you stand behind us and show fellow survivors that you stand behind us. So Please do upload your photo via Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter with the hashtag #IBelieveYou. And let's see you stand with us survivors. In closing, I wanted to reach out and let everybody know that if somebody comes to you and trusts you enough to disclose to you that they have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, the right thing to say to them is, "I believe you." It's very important for them to hear. It's not easy disclosing what happened to yourself to someone. Remember that when somebody comes to you and shares something so personal with you, that all they really need to hear back from you is that you believe them and that you support them. So thank you for joining me today. Tune in next Saturday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time when we will be discussing true stories ripped from Canadian headlines. And until then, don't forget to start the conversation. Thank you.